This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. See more of every property on the realestate.com.au app.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the housing markets. And after the holiday period and public holidays, we can give you a slightly more realistic view of the markets today. Across the country, 1,330 home auctions, and of those, 67.4% were sold, which is solid. Sydney, 322 auctions, just under 63% sold, better than most of last year. Melbourne was even stronger, 428 auctions, 71% of those were completed. Brisbane remains super strong, 120 auctions, just under 76% of those sold. But if that was strong, Adelaide's in another stratosphere, 99 auctions and all but 8 sold. The clearance rate, 91.9%, is extraordinary. Canberra had 113 auctions and almost 72% were successful. Well, being the beginning of a new month, we also see the latest home price movements for the previous month, and broadly the trend from 2025 remains. Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide still strong. Melbourne, Sydney and Canberra, plus Hobart less so. Let's bring in here Angus Moore, Senior Economist with REA Group, which put out the home price data today. Angus, always good to chat to you. I just wonder, this suggestion of higher interest rates this year, not one but potentially 2 interest rate rises that the markets are predicting, does it have much of an impact on what you expect to see based on these numbers today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the short answer is probably yes. You know, higher interest rates reduce borrowing capacity. At the margin, we'd expect that to slow home price growth, and that's probably what we'll see. We were maybe even seeing a little bit of that in January. You know, the fact that higher rates were expected for some of the month at least, and, you know, coming into the back half of last year, inflation did look a bit stronger than expected. That might have been starting to cool markets. It's always a little hard to know in January because we don't see a lot of housing market activity in January, so it can be a little hard to read momentum. But Melbourne and Sydney do look like they've slowed a bit. But
the one thing, if you look at the annual numbers here, the contrast between Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane, and then you go Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra and Hobart by comparison, which are, you know, they're chalk and cheese. There's been a fundamentally shift in the price, sort of, if you like, pecking order in Australia.
Yeah, and that's a story that we've been seeing really for 5 years, 6 years at this point. You know, those smaller capitals, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, have just continued to see incredibly strong growth. Well, that means, you know, if we add it up over the past 5 or 6 years, prices have basically doubled in Perth, in Adelaide, in Brisbane. They have not in Melbourne, they have not in Sydney. And so those cities are just far less affordable than they used to be.
But it's not just, say, for example, in the cities, in the capital cities in those states, but you even see here the regional numbers where, you know, during this period of time, the past year, the regional Queensland, South Australia, WA, have much easily outstripped regional New South Wales and Victoria.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, part of the story there is migration. You know, we have been seeing people move interstate from Victoria, from New South Wales to those other states. It's not as strong at the moment as what we were seeing in, say, 21, 22, you know, during the COVID era boom, but we are still seeing that. Part of that's structural. You know, Queensland always sees people moving there from New South Wales and Victoria. New South Wales always loses people to other states because it is so expensive to buy homes here in part. But part of that is supporting housing demand there. The other factor that's going on at the margin as well is there's just not a lot of homes for sale in WA, in Queensland, in South Australia, whereas Sydney and Melbourne are seeing relatively healthy choice for buyers. And so that's making homes a little bit less competitive in those cities, a bit more competitive in Brisbane, in Perth, in Adelaide.
OK, there's a couple of other bits and pieces here. We know that with, in particular, land tax in Victoria having been increased so much, plus also very strong prices in Sydney in particular, that a lot of people who might be investors would be attracted to some of those other capital cities. Stronger rates of growth, stronger rental markets. I wonder how much is actually a shift of capital out of some of those big states.
Yeah, and you know, to add to that, there have also been incredibly tight rental markets in those cities. You know, Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane have all been seeing rental vacancy rates, you know, sub 1% through 2022, 23, 24. Rents growing at, you know, high teens, which obviously can be an attractive environment for an investor. Very challenging for a renter, but very attractive for investors. The short answer is yes, we're probably seeing some of that. It's surprisingly hard to track. The data that we get is actually where properties are bought, not necessarily where the investor is coming from. But what we do see is, you know, if we look across the country, the share of loans going to investors at the moment is at record highs in places like the NT, in SA. It's very close to record highs in WA and Queensland. New South Wales and Victoria, not as strong, though, you know, Victoria's been lagging for a long time. Variety of reasons for that, land tax being one of them, though it has ticked up a bit towards the end of last year.
OK, so then the question is, this year coming, And with that higher interest rate situation, generally those that have risen the most are the ones that come off the fastest. What's your own sense about this, or do you think the dynamics of those smaller capital cities really doing best is likely to be the ongoing theme this year?
We're still expecting they'll outperform this year, in part because of what we were talking about before, with the fact that there just isn't a lot of homes available for sale. It is very competitive conditions in those markets. But we're not expecting to see the same degree of outperformance this year as we have been in recent years. And the reason for that's just relative affordability. You know, particularly compared to Melbourne, places like Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth are just quite expensive now. And so, you know, that at the margin should start to slow the pace of price growth, particularly if we see rate hikes through the early part of this year.
It's going to be fascinating just to see how it pans out. And of course, the government's first home buyer incentives are out there also kicking some of those markets along as well. Angus, always good to chat to you. Many thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ross.